Thanks, Bunny. Thanks very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. What a beautiful day, and what a great place to end this Australian tour on the Sunshine Coast. The name says it all, right? We arrived to a cold Perth, cold Adelaide, cold outback, north southern Australia, camping with a fever and losing my voice, but determined to see the ancient sites. Wasn't going to give up on that. And so I'm really happy to come to the warm part of Australia to finish off this tour. So the whole idea of this gathering today is to share a philosophy on a way forward. What do we do as a civilization and as a species that is very confused about our place in the universe? How do we move forward? How do we try and get ourselves out of the mess that we seem to be in? By the way, before I start, let me do what I do at all my presentations. By show of hands, how many of you are happy with the way the world is going? With what the government is doing for us, what your life's purpose is? Do you think this is what you were born for? If you think this is all just going hunky-dory and perfectly, please raise your hand. Okay, so we still have a 100% dissatisfaction rate. For a 6-year period now, I've been doing this. Even in Germany, when I was talking to 3,000 people in a big hall, not one single person put up their hand to say that they are happy with the way the world is going and happy with their lives. So clearly something is wrong with this picture, and that's really what this is all about. Are we going to sit on the fence or keep making excuses, or are we going to actually do something about it? And I believe that the time has come that we start putting into practice the wisdom and the knowledge that we've learned. So what Barney asked me to do is to do something different, which I haven't done. I was first reluctant to do that, but then I thought, okay, why the hell not, you know? He said, can you just talk a little bit about the ancient civilizations before you go into the Ubuntu thing? Now, if you don't want me to talk about the ancient civilizations, then go away for 1.5 hours and come back, and then you can join us. But it is actually the foundation that led me to contemplate a world without money, to talk about what we're going to do, and to figure out, from learning from the ancients, what we should be doing into the future. So just, if you don't know, these are just some of my books. I call this presentation Out of the Matrix of Separation and into Unity and Abundance. And that picture is very specific. Can you see that? Is it all right? Do we need to dim some of these lights, or is it okay? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and connect the dots and look into the ancient past to see what we can learn, what wisdom we can learn. I'm going to go through this really quickly because otherwise we're going to be here for 2 days. Because this presentation itself is normally about 3.5 hours. So connect the dots from the ancient past, because it seems that the ancients knew a lot more about what we do about the great human puzzle. Who are we? Where do we come from? Why are we here? All of us contemplate those questions, and we still keep bringing those up. And there are no definite answers for that. And that points us very clearly into the fact that we're a species with amnesia, because the ancient civilizations seem to be far more aware of who we are, where we come from, and why we're here. And they left us clues and information, specifically through oral tradition, for thousands and thousands of years. But it seems that about 500 years ago, when those thugs from Europe started colonizing the free world, the first thing they did is they arrived, they severed the people from their ancestors, they replaced their knowledge and their writings with Eurocentric books, and specifically the Bible. And this is how they started creating a species with amnesia, where we forget who we are. We are severed from our ancestors, and the knowledge and the wisdom has been passed down orally for thousands and thousands of years. But some of these very wise men and women that have held on to this ancient knowledge and wisdom have remained among us, and fortunately they've been able to continue sharing this knowledge and information with us. What we find when we start looking back into time is that history is much older and stranger and more exciting than most of us can imagine. And this is truly very, very important consideration for us to wrap our heads around. Much. It's like we're living in our own science fiction movie. And the more you look at this, the weirder and stranger it becomes. In the Bible, we read, when the gods were on earth, there were giants. And, if you just read this, and most of us have read the Bible or the Quran or whatever, but specifically with the Bible here, the Quran talks about the giants as well. But specifically the Bible. If you go down to the pub and you start talking to the guy next to you having a beer, hey, so how about those giants? What do you think is going to happen? And yet, the most respected book in all of our modern history, the most popular book that has sold more copies than any other book in the world, the one that so many people hang all their entire life on, talks extensively about the giants. But if you try and bring this up in a conversation at a barbecue, or as we call a braai, people will just tell you, you've lost your mind. So in the book of Numbers, we read in great detail about the giants, and for example, Numbers 13:28. But the people who lived there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. And you realize that these beings that they're referred to in the Bible are mysterious ancient entities that we know very, very little about, because that's been beaten out of us. That's part of the process of creating a species with amnesia. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, and we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. So it suggests to us that these guys are so big that we look like grasshoppers to them. So how big is that really? Well, the Jewish Encyclopedia describes the giants as follows. According to rabbinical tradition, the Anakim are the same titanic race, giants, gigantic, titanic, as the Rephaim, the Nephilim, the Gibborim, the Zamzumim, and the Emim. Now, how many of you know who the Emim or the Zamzumim are? Or the Gibborim? Exactly. And yet the most popular book in the world tells us very clearly that these people lived and they were around and they were very big. We were like grasshoppers next to them. So next time you go to the pub, strike up a conversation with somebody. Say, hey, so how about these giants in history? And see what happens. And maybe you can shed some light on this for the lesser informed. What's important is that we have the physical evidence, but every time you bring it up, the mainstream would scoff at you. Unfortunately, that is shifting so quickly that the mainstream is no longer significant, and the fringe is becoming the mainstream very, very quickly. There are more scientists, more researchers outside of the so-called mainstream that are doing incredible work. So the power and the energy is shifting now, where more people are paying attention to the alternative than to what you see on the 8 o'clock news. This is a great example of one such giant in the ancient times. There's a lot more I can tell you about this, but I've got to speed this up. So this is an individual that would have been about 7.5 meters tall. What's fascinating is that my friend Klaus Donner in Vienna, who I'm going to see next week at our conferences through Europe, he discovered the fragments of a giant in Ecuador that were genetically tested and concluded that it came from a giant human. It was a nose bone, a heel bone, and a skull fragment. And if you start looking at this further, you see a beautiful image that you can find on the internet that shows you actual historic discoveries of giants. There we are, over there, extreme left. That's us there, 6 feet tall. This fellow is interesting, isn't he? 36 feet. And so that footprint that we found in South Africa seems to be of one of these individuals. How and why that footprint can appear in granite is another mystery. And if you went to geology school, you will jump up and down and claim it's not possible, but I'll take you, if we had more time, through very basic laws of understanding of the laws of nature, how that is not only possible, but is probably what happened over there. So what I'm sharing with you, I ask you, please go away and do some more research, because often I'm going to just give you some bullet points. I can't go into detail or scientific substantiation for it, because this morning this is like an overview of some of this historic stuff. The ancient sites are much older than we can imagine, and Stonehenge is actually a beautiful example of the evidence that we get provided. First of all, pay attention to this stone over here. At some stage it fell over and broke. That's the break over there. It used to stand next to this one, and they were connected at the top there somewhere. Right? And look at the other stones around Stonehenge, look at the shape of it, and that's what we miss. Critical thing is that Stonehenge was reconstructed in 1954. Once again, a big surprise to many people. It was completely and utterly reconstructed. It didn't look like it looks today. Some sort of a deception took place. They made us believe that Stonehenge was much younger than it is, because the way it used to look before 1954 is certainly not the way it looks today. And the erosion on the stones suggests exactly that. If you look at the erosion, the edges on these stones are very, very different to all the ancient sites we see around the earth, on the planet. They're very beautiful square-cut blocks, and so we can imagine that these stones look the same in the original state. Beautifully finished off square-cut blocks. And the reason I say that is that stone there that fell over and broke. Well, that's the break. That break does not indicate a few thousand years old. It shows us the erosion on that break is very, very old. Probably more than 1 million years of geological erosion on sarsen stone. Extremely hard. So the geology in Stonehenge tells us how old this place is. But our minds don't allow us to go there because we haven't been around for that long, have we? That's according to mainstream history and archaeology. Well, that's all about to change, and that's changed a long time for many that have gone down this path. The ancient stone ruins in South Africa bring us a huge amount of information and put us on a very, very different path of thinking about our ancient past, our ancestors, who we are, where we come from. They often refer to as cattle kraal or cattle enclosures for cows, and they were also known as dwellings for humans. So these stone circles are very unique. The fascination with them go back 500 years ago to the Portuguese explorers as they came around the Cape of Good Hope on their way to India. And what you'll find that none of these stone circles are the same. Each one is completely and utterly unique. Many of these photographs are taken by Johann Heine, started in the mid-80s already, when he started photographing them from aerial photographs, and it's only from the aerial photographs that you start realizing we're dealing with something very special and very unique. The critical thing to realize here, by the way, when you start seeing beautiful flower-shaped structures like this, that's not by accident, it's very specifically by design, and it's got very specific intent in there. And then you realize that these are not just thrown together, that they actually have very specific structure, and these structures somehow follow the laws of nature. And this one is very specifically the 5-factor encoded in it. You start seeing equilateral triangles that turn into star tetrahedrons, and you realize that this is not just by accident, but certainly either by intent or for some other reasons. And we have channels that connect these stone circles. There you can see these channels. Every stone circle is connected to all the other stone circles by these channels. And these channels run for thousands of kilometers, connecting all of them together. They never stand alone. And if they do stand alone, it means that whatever was around them has been eroded or destroyed. There you can see another channel that goes into a cluster of hexagonal cells over there. And that doesn't make any sense, hexagonal cells. More channels just to show you that this is not just a coincidence, but in fact is the connecting structure that holds all these stone circles together. And from this vantage point on top of the mountain, if you look 100 kilometers in any direction, it would have looked like this a long time ago, but a lot of these places are eroded and destroyed now by township development, farming, agriculture, forestry. And then archaeological drawings from 1939 show us that these structures have no doors and entrances, and they're all connected by these channels, as you can see. And this is just amazing how this has been ignored by a mainstream academia. And sometimes these stone circles are concentric circles with no doors and entrances, all connected by these channels. And you start to ask yourself, well, what the hell is going on here? Adam's calendar is what I called this site when it was first rediscovered by Johann Heine in 2003. I first was taken there in 2007 and realized that it was a highly significant place, and started researching it with Johann first and then on my own. And I gave it the name Adam's Calendar, and that seems to have stuck. Because I somehow knew that it was connected to the origins of humankind and to our place on this planet. And that's exactly what Baba Credo Mutwa told me. He is one of the few knowledge keepers that has held onto the oral tradition and the oral knowledge passed down over thousands of years. He shared many, many important insights with me over several meetings. And he tells me he was initiated there in 1937. He calls it Inzalo Yelanga in Zulu, which means birthplace of the sun, which actually means birthplace of humanity. The sun as in S-O-N and not sun as in S-U-N. The son of the gods. This is where humanity was created by the gods, who came from the stars. As in all ancient cultures, it is the same story over and over again that tell us our ancestors came from the stars. And unfortunately, that did not fit well into the Eurocentric education system, so that was very systematically removed from our psyche and from our knowledge pool. So now if you suggest that to somebody, they think you're kook or you're crazy and you've lost your mind, because that's how dumbed down we've become. We completely and utterly ignore the wisdom of the ancients, and we keep promoting and propagating the propaganda that we've been sold by the Eurocentric education system. So this is what Adam's calendar looks like from a helicopter. There you can see the edge of the cliff. It drops down about 200 meters here, and then eventually about 1 kilometer into the Barberton Valley. That it is a circular structure that's really badly destroyed. That is north. That tree there is south. Those are the two central calendar stones. Think of them as vibrating plates. This is all silica. Okay, very, very high content of crystalline substance, and therein we start seeing the important clues that we find. This is a reconstructed view of Adam's calendar looking out at the Barberton Valley, and there you can see the Horus stone and the 3 stones of Orion. Horus looking at the rise of Orion, which are lined up with those 2 pyramidal structures over there that are also aligned with the rise of Orion on a specific on the winter solstice. So the question is, how many of these ruins are there in southern Africa? Because if they're just a few scattered ruins, it's not really that impressive. But when you start studying this, everything changes. In 1891, Theodore Bent from horseback estimated that there were about 4,000 of these ruins. Theodore Bent did a lot of traveling throughout southern Africa. He is also this is, by the way, the inside view of Great Zimbabwe with the famous conical tower. And Theodore Bent was the first guy to really write a detailed report of his archaeological explorations at Great Zimbabwe. And that has been very carefully shoved aside under the carpet. It's very difficult to get his book that went out of print in, I think, 1905. This is Great Zimbabwe from a side view and an aerial photograph of Great Zimbabwe, and you can clearly see that it is the same kind of structure as the rest of the stone circles of southern Africa, just a far more impressive version of that. By 1974, Roger Summers did a calculation and he came up with a 20,000 stone ruin figure. And that's really exciting. That's when I discovered this and I went, wow, this is great. You know, we live in the land of Indiana Jones. 20,000 ancient sites, this is fantastic. And by the time I started researching this in 2007, I called up Revel Mason, who is the retired head of archaeology at my old university in Johannesburg, Wits University. And I asked him, how many of these ruins do you think there are? And he said, there must be at least 100,000. And I said, wow, that's fantastic, because at that stage, I thought there were about 100,000 of these, which is just an insane idea. And so he just supported that. And then I said to him, because at that stage, I still thought we were dealing with dwellings for either humans or cows, right? Because that's what everybody tells you. And so I thought, well, Revel, but this is a big problem. Because if we've got 100,000 of these ruins and they're dwellings, and we allocate, say, 10 people per ruin, then we got a population of 1 million people in ancient times. And this is just insane, because all history books tell us that nobody lived in southern Africa. It was virtually unpopulated. There were a bunch of hunter-gatherers known as Bushmen running around. There was nobody there. The African people the so-called African or Bantu tribes only arrived in southern Africa some 3,000 years ago, if you're lucky. So we've got a serious problem, because these structures are a lot older than that. So Revel immediately went back into his academic box and said, well, then there can't be 100,000 ruins. And, well, there they are. And we deny that they are there because the history books tell us that nobody lived there, so they couldn't have built them. And this is the kind of stuff that happens when you start dealing with mainstream information and mainstream textbooks. And going back to refer to what other textbooks wrote without any substantiation. And this is the problem. So I started counting these ruins, trying to get a scientific support for 100,000. I thought, I've got to find out, at least get some semblance of idea that there are 100,000 of these structures. And I started looking at aerial pictures and Google Earth photographs and getting averages per square kilometer, per hectare, and so forth. And I started finding these stone circles everywhere. Unfortunately, this light is just too bright, guys, so you're not going to be able to appreciate this. And I found that this one, for example, other side of Rustenburg on the way to Botswana, is just insane. And it actually is something very different, this, which I'm probably not going to have time to get into this morning. But this covers about 5 by 5 kilometers. It just never stops. It goes on and on and on. And historians tell us that this was built by the Tswana tribe in the 1800s. And if you just do the numbers, there weren't enough Tswana people alive to build the structure at that stage. So, and this brings us back towards Watervalboven and Machadodorp, where I live. And by the time I finished putting all these averages together, I came up with a number that there were more than 10 million of these structures. And that changes everything. It changes your perspective and your ideas to what was going on here. And the key thing that it does, it makes us realize how little we know, and that we're dealing with a vanished civilization at the southern tip of Africa that were doing some weird things that we have no idea about. So what was all this activity in southern Africa about? It's always about one thing. It's always about the gold. It's impossible to separate human history and our place as the human race on this planet. It's impossible to separate it from the gold. If you think about the Bible, in the second book of Genesis, Genesis 2, before Eve is yet fashioned from Adam's rib, the narrator, whoever the narrator may be, talks about the gold. So gold is even more important than Eve. Gold takes on this huge prominence in this book called the Bible. And we realize that this is what it's all about. Our presence on this planet is directly connected to gold. And how many gold mines are there in southern Africa? Well, in the town of Lydenburg, just around the town of Lydenburg, which is incidentally also famous for these strange-looking African heads known as the Lydenburg heads that don't look very human if you start analyzing them. Just around Lydenburg, a geological survey was done between 2005 and 2010, and they started counting these mines, these ancient mines that are into the side of the mountain. They're known as adit mines. And they were active until very recently, until the 20s and 30s. They were still mining these mines. And by the time they finished counting these in 2010, they counted around 75,000 of these adit mines. So that just shows us one little indication of how much gold mining has been going on. And that's just around one town of Lydenburg. Mysterious tunnels in the 1930s were found by gold miners in the Limpopo province. They were filled with weird tools and artifacts that were confiscated by the mining authorities in those days. In the Volkberg, also in the northern province, there are kilometers and kilometers of tunnels that look something like this, that are completely unknown to people. They're filled with platinum slag. They were mining gold, but they left the platinum slag behind, not interested in the platinum. In the 1990s, De Beers found a mine shaft 22,000 feet deep, cut with absolute precision, with technology that they did not possess at the time. And if De Beers don't have that technology, then no one should have that technology. Well, the same company, De Beers and Anglo-American today, have a secret file that covers up ancient mines and shafts. And if you know, Anglo-American was one of the largest companies in the world for probably 100 years. And so I know from speaking to the chief geologist of Anglo-American that when they find ancient mines, they don't do anything with it. They simply cover it up and they move on. He told me this over a beer at a pub. That's how bizarre this stuff gets. And in 2014, just recently, in a mine in South Africa, they found when the side of the tunnel down on this side broke on one of these sides, just fell in and exposed an ancient tunnel that was running parallel to this new mine. It was very quickly closed up. Everyone was removed. That part of the mine was closed, never to be re-entered again. And so it goes. In the northeast Zimbabwe, the Nyanga province, there are thousands of these so-called slave pits. Well, they're not slave pits, they're not animal pits, and they're not grain pits. What they actually are some sort of purification extraction tank for gold. Why do we know this? Because a very bright geologist at Zimbabwe University by the name of Ann Kritzinger has done a big study on this and published several papers on this, where she clearly shows that these have got inlet valves and outlet valves somewhere. She found them at all these so-called slave pits. And these outlet valves, at the outlet valves, she got up to 2 grams per ton of gold sediment. So the only conclusion you can reach is they were using it for processing gold somehow. And then the most amazing discovery was, this came to me about 3 years ago from the father of Raymond Dix, who was our legal advisor against the Standard Bank in the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court in South Africa, when he told me that he was a part of a rescue team in Carletonville, South Africa, one of the mining towns on the West Rand. And he couldn't remember what year it was, but around 1975, they went into a sinkhole and to test the equipment. And when they got to the bottom of the sinkhole, they found one side of it caved in. And they opened it up and they walked in to find a tunnel that was completely paved, something like this. It wasn't backlit when they went in there, but this is just to show you. And it was completely paved all around. And when they went into the dark tunnel, several meters into the darkness, they stumbled upon one of these, a pre-Inca kind of deity or Viracocha deity, which is connected to gold once again. And he told me that they got so scared, they just got the hell out of that tunnel. They got up out of that sinkhole, and he never told anyone until he told me about 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. So a lot of mining activity going on in South Africa, and you also start seeing the connection between all ancient cultures. I can tell you that in other presentations I've shown people how you can connect it to the Egyptians, to the Romans, to the Greeks, to the Sumerians, to the Phoenicians, and now to the Incas. The one connection that we haven't got yet until this trip to Australia is to the Aborigines people of Australia. But now I found on my trip to these ancient sites that there is a connection there as well. And that makes me even more excited about this connection, this global connection of ancient cultures right across our planet. So who was in charge of all this gold mining in Southern Africa? And the Sumerian tablets tell us great detail who was in charge. And this is where we meet the Anunnaki or the Anunna gods. The Sumerian tablets is the story of the Anunna gods. That's pretty much what they tell us. And there's still people out there who say, oh, the Sumerian tablets don't mention the Anunnaki. Really? Every clay tablet you pick up, that's all they talk about is the Anunna gods. It never stops. And it talks about Anu and Lil and Enki, the father and the 2 sons. So some people, some researchers believe that the Anunnaki are actually the Anakim in the Bible. When the Bible talks about the Anakim, they're referring to the Anunnaki. And there's a lot of support for that. But it seems to be that the work in the Abzu, this place called the Abzu, is where the Anunnaki were active in mining the gold, because they were the ones interested in the gold, the Anunna gods. And the Abzu has been given many meanings, but specifically that's where the gold came from. So now that we know where these ancient gold mines were, where these millions of stone structures are, I think we can start connecting the dots to say Southern Africa is what they refer to as the Abzu, where the gold came from. And we read some of the Sumerian translations are very explicit about what was going on. In the Abzu, Enki plans was conceiving, where to build his house, where for heroes dwellings to prepare, where the bowels of the earth to enter, to mine the gold. And here we read about Enki's mines and his technology. The earth splitter, Enki there established, there within the earth a gash to make, by way of tunnels, earth's innards to reach, the golden veins to uncover. But to do this gold mining, they needed some help. And this is where we start getting into the very uncomfortable area that some people really struggle with, but we have to get over it, people. We have to figure out who we are, why we are a species with amnesia, and why we cannot figure out what the hell is going on, and why our lives are so miserable, and why we're under so much control, and why this global elite is running amok, doing what the hell they want with us. Let us create a Lulu, a primitive worker, the hardship work to take over. Let the being, the toil of the Anunnaki carry on his back. And we start seeing a very important connection between our scattered DNA and the fact that a cloned species was created at some stage to help the Anuna gods mining the gold. So this is where we read about planning to create the Adam, or the Adamu, as the Sumerian texts call it, the creation of the Adamu, the first being, or the first Lulu Amelu, or primitive worker as they called it. A primitive worker shall be created. Our command will he understand. Our tools he will handle. To the Anunnaki in the Abzu, relief shall come. Very clear what the texts are telling us. And it's consistent with pretty much everything we read in the Bible once you start reading between the lines and stop getting caught up in the soap opera that has been imposed on top of the content of the Bible, and really getting the critical information extracted out of it, because it is full of very advanced knowledge and information that most of us miss. So just like the ancient texts are ignored and misinterpreted, the Bible remains one such great misinterpreted book. And this was exposed by this chap here, Michal Ledwith. Michal, as you can see, kept some very interesting company for about 17 years of his life. He was the advisor to the popes at the Vatican until he saw the light and he got the hell out of there. And Michal taught us one of, I believe, the most critical manipulations of our time. And it took me a few years to actually figure this out, until I realized that one single letter has changed the last 2,000 years of our history, and has pretty much been instrumental into allowing us to be abused and controlled because of what they did. What Michal found out is that the original phrase in Hebrew of the Bible does not mean or say what we all believe it says. We're all told that the Bible says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Well, the Hebrew original statement does not say that at all, because it was messed with. He found out that, first of all, the original statement says, Ba Rashit, Bara Elohim, Etha Shamaim wa Etha Iaris, which is grammatically completely nonsensical. It doesn't make sense until you add the or the Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, because all Hebrew texts, sacred texts, must begin with the first letter of the alphabet. This one, the most important book in our lives, doesn't follow that rule. The moment he applied that rule, everything changes. Now it says Abba, which means father. Abba Rashit, Bara Elohim, Etha Shamaim wa Etha Iaris. Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth. And that changes everything. And our entire 2,000-year misunderstanding of who God is shoved down the drain. And a whole new light is shone on who the true creator is and who the Elohim, or the Elohim is a plural, remember? This is why every time you read about El or God in the Bible, it actually says the gods, because it says Elohim. Now we have an understanding. The Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth. And we understand the difference between God with a big G, the creator of all things, and the gods with a small g, the Elohim, or the Anunnaki, or the Anak, or the Nephilim, or the Elohim. And we start getting a very different perspective. So if the Father of the beginnings is God, the creator of all things, then sound of God created everything. Because it tells us, God said, let there be light. So it was the sound of the Creator that brought everything forth in creation. And therein we suddenly have a common link between the Bible and all ancient civilizations. And now you see why it was so important for them to omit that first letter of that opening phrase, while they kept the Aleph out of it, the A, so that it would confuse us. Now that we have a connection between the Bible and all other ancient civilizations, we realize that it was sound that was the common denominator in all things. In Christianity, it's the Word of God. Hinduism, it's the Om, the primordial sound. The Egyptians tell us that the universe was sung into creation. And the Aboriginal people, or the Originese people, tell us that the universe and everything was brought together, came out of sacred songs. The Hindu creation is fantastic. It tells us that everything was so peaceful and silent that Vishnu slept undisturbed by dreams or motion. From the depths, a humming sound began to tremble. It grew and spread, filling the emptiness and throbbing with energy. Sound spread, throbbing. Can you see the resonance, the sound, the vibration, the frequency? That's what this is all about. The night had ended. Vishnu awoke. What does that mean? God said, "Let there be light." The night had ended. Same story, just in slightly different words, a little more dramatic. So what is sound? Now that we know what sound is, we can see that it's the source of all creation. Sound is the breath of the Creator. And what else does sound do? So if sound can create everything, or can bring forth everything in creation, that means we should be able to do everything with sound. And guess what? That's exactly what it is. Everything comes back to sound and resonance, vibration and frequency. Sound levitates, it boils water, it creates light, it creates DNA, it heals and destroys pathogens. Sound moves beyond the speed of light. This is one of the best kept secrets in all science, in our scientific world today. Sound makes things invisible. It energizes water and the air we breathe, without which energy we would not be able to survive by simply drinking the water or breathing the air, unless it's energized by sound. Sound is a precursor to electromagnetism. So just to show you, you all know this by now, or you should know this, that sound manifests in physical form. One of the simplest examples of this is by putting sand on a metal plate. You can do it with rice, you can do it with all kinds of things. And just to remind you how this works, every sound frequency has got its own very specific shape and form. This is what's referred to as the prime resonance frequency. Or you can call it what Star Trek called it, the prime directive. And suddenly you start seeing a very important expose of what it means. You cannot breach the prime directive. It means you can't breach the prime resonance frequency or the source code of creation, because then you start to destroy yourself, because then you are in dissonance with yourself and everything in creation. You're in dis-ease, and what happens? And you'll see the reason for that. So this is just an example of how sound, this invisible thing that you can't see the sound waves going from me to your ears, can you? And yet you can understand everything I'm telling you. So in essence, we're creating magic here. Because if somebody that's never heard or seen anyone speak, and you nodding and going, yeah, they'll think, wow, what's going on here? Well, you know. So we're creating magic, but we've accepted this as a form of magic. So let's use this to be able to expand our minds to much greater things. Cymatics, this is what this is called, cymatics. And then the cymoscope, which is a device that was created by this guy called Eric Larson in Oregon, USA, shows you how the human voice manifests an infinite number of shapes. As you speak, every little frequency in your voice shows you, the cymoscope shows you how your voice keeps making these incredible amounts of cymatic patterns. And this is just spectacular. And through these cymatic patterns and the photographs of Eric Larson and the cymoscope, we discover some very important stills photographs that indicate to us how the ancients, or the elite that have taken control of our planet, understood this. And they knew that sound is the creative source of all things. And you realize that this is where the religious symbols come from. The cross in a circle as a source of sound. And you start seeing the cross in a circle being encoded in our religious symbols, and it suddenly starts to make sense to us where these guys get their symbolisms from, because they know this stuff. They have been hiding it from us all these years. And even the medicine wheel is just a cross in a circle, showing us that the ancient Native American medicine men knew that sound heals. It does all these things. The original people of Australia tell us that time began when the supernatural beings awoke and broke through the surface of the earth. They moved about the earth, bringing into being the physical features and landscapes. And they did this with 3 sacred songs. This really shows you how, when you put lycopodium powder, very, very fine powder on a metal plate, and you put this vibration through the bottom. By manipulating the vibration, it moves around and it forms mountains and valleys and crevices, and you start seeing how the surface of the earth was formed and shaped by the vibration coming out of the center of the earth. And everything moves around and forms itself. And here's just an example that I taken from the aeroplane moving in South Australia. And pretty much this is what you'll see when you look at that video clip. Beautiful cymatic patterns, mountains, and this looks just like, even the color of the lycopodium powder is very similar to this when you look at that video clip. So it gives you an indication where the landscapes of the earth come from. And the original people of Australia told us this thousands and thousands of years ago already. All these aerial photographs that you look at give you an indication that we're dealing at the formation of the surface matter on earth through the sound frequencies coming out of the sound underneath, and you'll see how important and connected this is. And this brings us to sound as a tool and technology. Well, the ankh is a very famous tool and an advanced technological device. The Egyptians used it for healing. It's a tuning fork, it's a frequency device, it's a source of resonance and sound. And with this they could do all kinds of things. They could levitate, we don't have time to go into that. They could deconstruct, they could dematerialize, they could heal, everything. Because remember, prime resonance frequency. That's what this is all about. Everything has its own prime resonance frequency. If you know the frequency of a specific rock, you can dematerialize it, you can make it soft, so you can mold it, you can do whatever you want with it. The Ark of the Covenant is one of the greatest examples of advanced tools and technology. Remember, it was never carried. Those poles were not there for carrying it. It's impossible for 4 or 6 guys to carry a 3-ton Ark of the Covenant, because that's how much it would have weighed with all the gold around it and the size of it. If you do the numbers, the calculation, you'll see what I mean. So, and the Bible tells us, after all, that the Ark never touched the ground. It always hovered above the ground and was simply pushed along by the people that were working with it. And the Bible tells us that God tells Moses, go and sit on the mercy seat. There's a mercy seat missing there. I don't know where these guys, they don't read their Bible before they make these drawings. It tells us, go and sit in the mercy seat underneath the wings of the cherubim, and I will talk to you when you sit there, and I'll tell you what to tell the Israelites. So clearly it's a communication device. And whatever else was in it. And this is the Ark of the Covenant that brought down the walls of Jericho. It was a resonance device. It tells us, walk around the walls of Jericho 6 times. And you start seeing these numbers. And on the 7th time, you let your army and the men give a big shout, and then blast the trumpet very, very loudly. And it tells us, with a shout and a blast from the trumpet, the walls came tumbling down. So we realize that there was a resonance, that low hum shaking that loosened the walls of Jericho. And then with some sort of electromagnetic pulse or a wave, a pressure wave, the walls came tumbling down. And you start seeing that's all to do with resonance, all this ancient stuff. John Keeley in 1888 already was levitating stuff in his workshop in Philadelphia. And he was crushing giant blocks of rock into the finest powder within minutes. We can't do that today. We don't have that technology. All with sound. Sound creates light. Sound levitates. Now, once again, go onto YouTube and find this levitation video. There's several levitation videos. This is not, however, how the ancients used to levitate. They did not use pressure waves of sound that would levitate very light objects. The ancients used sound moving beyond the speed of light, or hypersound, which we're coming to which distorts gravity fields and can actually start levitating things, because that's what happens. Remember, I said sound moves beyond the speed of light, one of the best kept secrets. Peter Davey from New Zealand, who died several years ago, was boiling water with sound until he died, from the 40s already. What I find fascinating is that, this was poo-pooed by everyone, by the media and so forth. But in essence, what he actually did, he gave us the first step towards free energy and free electricity. Because if we can boil water with sound, we don't need our coal power plants. We don't need to burn coal to boil the water, to create the steam, to create the electricity. If we can boil water with sound, we can stop mining coal, and we can give ourselves free electricity, because then at least we're boiling the water and we're just recycling the steam, and we're not destroying anything. This is what his original device looked like. Why I show you this, because from my research that I've done, apparently, very in the beginning, before electricity was available in the 40s, before electricity was available sort of everywhere, Peter Davy was boiling the water by putting two bicycle bells into each other, one smaller one into a larger one. And by just tring, tring, ringing the bicycle bell, the water would boil. Now, that's the kind of technology I want in my house, right? Honey, we've run out of hot water. Don't worry. Tring, tring. Thank you. Gonna have a shower, baby. The magnetron, which is in laser beams here, this thing that creates the laser beam that goes there, this pointer, there's a little magnetron in laser beams. There's magnetrons in very powerful laser beams that cut metal in a split second. So magnetrons are very powerful energy-generating devices, and they are generated by sound. Here it tells you, the resonant cavity magnetron, resonance, sound. It's all to do with sound. Sound acts as a cloak of invisibility. This is just more than a year old now. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory released this information last year. And at the same time, they did another experiment where they built this weird 3D, this weird looking pyramid like this, and they found that whatever they put underneath it and they exposed it to a certain sound frequency, it made the things underneath it invisible. Wow, isn't that interesting? What do monks do in monasteries? They sit and they chant, and they get a very specific resonance going. And is this resonance that they get going the reason why the monasteries were built very similar to this kind of pyramid, so that if they come under attack by marauding armies who want to do them harm, all they do is they get together, they chant, and become invisible. Isn't that a great form of defense? So there's no one here, let's move on. And then in 1931, one of the most famous historic moments is when Royal Raymond Rife was awarded the man who found the cure for all disease by the American Medical Institute, or whatever they were called. And they sang his praises, only to completely destroy him after that, when they realized that finding a cure for all disease is not good for business. So very quickly he was removed. And this is very important. We forget about these things. At medical school, no one ever hears of Royal Raymond Rife. It doesn't even enter the equation. I spent 5 years at medical school. When I heard of Royal Rife after this, I went, who, what? It's a shock to the system when you see how this breakthrough knowledge and information is hidden from us. And I actually found Royal Raymond Rife's handwritten documents in a library in Sedona, Arizona. This is his book, which contains all his handwritten frequencies. This one is for all the different cancers. This is the next page was for, this is for what? For diphtheria. This one is for tuberculosis. And I took maybe 200 photographs in that book. It's about 800 pages until I got bored. But the information is still out there. But we've gone a lot further than that now, because new researchers have shown us how in modern days, in 2011, we can cure cancer by just blowing up the cancer cells, destroying them with a certain frequency. Now, again, I can't show you this video, so you're going to have to go and look this up. This is from 2011, one of the universities in America. The music professor at the music department discovered this. Right? He wasn't even in the field of science or medicine. And he found that certain resonant frequencies just destroy cancer cells. And the video shows them destroying all kinds of cancer cells, from leukemia to pancreatic cells and brain tumors and so forth. And we can cure all disease, people. This is what we're learning from ancient civilizations, from our understanding of sound and resonance, and this thing called the prime resonance frequency. And then I discovered that it's the actual sound of the air we breathe that energizes the oxygen we breathe, without which the oxygen would be completely useless. It would be depleted oxygen. Because, once again, not once did they teach me at medical school what happens to the oxygen when you breathe it in. It's like, the BS baffles the brain. Well, it's oxygen, you breathe it in, and then when you no longer need it, you breathe it out. No, but what happens to the oxygen? That's the part they don't teach us. So, the oxygen, as you breathe it in, the sound of the air you breathe speeds up into ever-decreasing apertures and capillaries, and from the bronchus, the bronchi, and to the alveoli. By the time the air reaches the alveoli into your lungs, it's moving at hypersound speeds. And that is what actually energizes the oxygen. And then it goes into your body, and your body uses the energy of the oxygen, at which point you breathe it out. just to repeat the cycle. So it's the sound of the air we breathe. Just like when water falls in nature, it's the sound of the water. And vortex fields, spirals, when you spiral water through a vortex field, it's the sound of that spiral that actually does the energization. And not just the motion of it. So notice the important thing here as well, the alveoli, the bronchus, the bronchi, and then the alveoli, very specific hexagonal structures of the alveoli, which points us towards what some of the ancient stone ruins were actually for in southern Africa. Sound creates superclusters in galaxies. This is from 2003 when NASA exposed the fact that they picked up a supercluster, sound waves 57 octaves lower than middle C, are rumbling away from a supermassive black hole in the Perseus cluster, 250 million light years away. And it seems to be ringing at B flat. It's very important because some of the stones that I've been picking up and in my demonstration of the ringing stones, some of those stones, most of those stones ring at B flat. Now I haven't figured this out yet, but there must be a connection. These things are not coincidences. So it's a frequency over 1 million billion times deeper than the limits of our hearing. It's the deepest note ever detected from an object in the universe. And this is cymatic patterns. If you could have seen that the sound moving through the earth and creating the landscapes that the original people tell us about, it looks exactly like this, these cymatic patterns. This is from a supercluster of galaxies. So once again, it's cymatic patterns. It is the sound, the resonance that brings forth all of this stuff. There's another photograph. Just you recognize the cymatic patterns coming from that source. And then in 2011, this is one of the most spectacular breakthroughs, is Luc Montagnier manifested DNA, spontaneously manifested DNA with sound frequency. Now, remember what DNA is. It's got all the knowledge, all the codes, all the programming for your body. So if we can manifest DNA with sound, with all that knowledge encoded in it, we can pretty much do anything and everything with sound and resonance. And these are the things that we need to start thinking about. So what it tells us is that sound is the ultimate source of free energy, and because it's the source of all things. We all know now that the earth rings like a bell. It doesn't stop ringing. It rings all the time. And Nikola Tesla knew this, and he used the earth as a resonator when he created his Tesla Tower and gave the world free energy, which was very quickly destroyed by who? J.P. Morgan, one of the founding fathers of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, just a few years after they destroyed Nikola Tesla, because it wasn't good for business to give the world free electricity. So what does this all have to do with ancient civilizations? Everything, because we now see that they knew all this stuff long before we come around to refigure it out for ourselves. And they used energy and sound as a source of energy, and they used sound and resonance as a source of energy and a tool for everything they did. But unfortunately, that brings us to the three holy cows of our education system. And this is the big thing. Until we get across this little hurdle, we're constantly going to be trapped in this paradigm and in our stupidity and ignorance, unfortunately. And these three holy cows are that humans evolved out of apes, that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, and that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. Please, people, this is part of the manipulation and the disinformation tactic. And the moment you start arguing against us at school, what happens to you? You're reprimanded, or you're sent home, or you fail. You will fail because you argue against us. So it is a theory of evolution. We're not going to go into this. This is a huge subject that we can discuss forever. But it is very obvious for those of you that have done your research, and you have to go to do your own research in this area. Our DNA is not an evolved DNA. It is a spliced and manipulated DNA. This is something we have to deal with. All the greatest geneticists and molecular biologists in the world today, they've been brave enough to bring this forward. Very few of them are associated with universities, because universities will not allow you to get this information out there. This is why universities are not places of knowledge and information. Where that is shared, it is where knowledge and information is actually obstructed and covered up. So you have to go to independent researchers for this information. Middle Tennessee State University. In 2005, 2 undergraduates and 3 high school students propelled sound beyond the speed of light. This was published in the American Institute of Physics, never to be heard of again. And this should have been on all the newspaper headlines, all the radio and TV station headlines. This is a major, huge breakthrough in science and our understanding of physics. Now, again, remember that just to understand how sound moves beyond the speed of light, just in this reality, and we can't think of sound as resonance just in this reality. This is just one density that we're in on this planet. Sound and resonance has its own way it functions and operates outside of this reality. So we can't think of sound the way we think of it here. It is much bigger, far more than that. Now, through the vacuum, through the 0 point, once you move through the 0 point into what is referred to as the morphogenetic field, once you move through that 0 point, the density is infinite. We're dealing with infinite density. So everything we say, now that you know where sound comes from, it's the source of all things. Every thought you have, everything you say, every time you move anything, that resonance, that frequency goes into the center, the nucleus of every atom in your body, every atom in every cell that you have, and it goes into the morphogenetic field, which is infinitely dense. And that sound and resonance goes instantly throughout all fabric of creation. This is why sound and resonance travels instantly, and it covers the full spectrum of everything in creation. It doesn't take forever to get from here to there. That's what happens to light, not to sound. This is the thing. Light, think about it, even in this density here. If you put light through a prism, it slows down and it shows the different frequencies of light. If you put sound through a denser density, like sound travels faster in water. The denser the medium, the faster the speed of sound. So in an infinite density, sound moves infinitely fast, even in this reality here. It's just some things to contemplate. So light slows down, sound speeds up. And the fact that we cannot create or destroy energy, we can just convert it from one form to another. And then in the next moment, they tell us about the Big Bang. Everything we know of was created and brought forth. So really? So I just thought you told me that you can't create energy. Oh yeah, but it was already there. The energy was already there. It was just in a very, very tiny point. It was called a singularity. So it wasn't created, it was already there. And this is how they get around the fact that you can't create energy. You can just convert it from one form to another. And this is unfortunately the continuing manipulation of our young minds in this education system. So do we have physical evidence for such tools that manipulated and used sound in ancient times? Absolutely. The ancient tools and artifacts that I've been collecting, and many others around the world, are the evidence. The Taurus stone is one of the key players in this. The stones that ring like bells, that ring beautiful bells, make beautiful sounds. Like I said, one of the key sounds is a B flat, but they actually ring at multiple frequencies. We've measured many, many different frequencies coming out of one stone at the same time. We just hear one primary frequency, but there are many more coming out of the stones when you actually hit them and ring them. And then the key thing are the cone-shaped tools. This was a huge breakthrough to us understanding how the ancients used this technology and how they used the sound as a tool. The cone-shaped tools are key in this breakthrough discovery. I've been collecting these cone-shaped tools all around the stone circles, and then I mysteriously discovered that Edleed Skalnin, who in the 20s in Coral Castle, southern Florida, built this place called Coral Castle in southern Florida. Built this place called Coral Castle, all single-handedly. He cut and carved and manipulated and moved and stacked 10-ton blocks of coral. Now, if you've ever worked with stone, you know that this is simply not possible unless you have some real advanced technology. You can levitate stuff. You ain't going to be moving anything over 200 kilograms. For one person to move is virtually impossible, even with ropes and pulleys, which they say, oh, we did it with ropes and pulleys. Okay, how did he cut the rock? Oh no, he had a very secret saw. Where's the saw? Oh no, apparently just before he disappeared, he lent the saw to somebody else and the saw's gone. And you hear all these kinds of, so really? Wow, great. Anyway, he was apparently seen by 2 schoolboys moving these big blocks with ice cream cones in his hands. Now, ice cream cones in his hands, that's what the children saw. And this stuck, and I realized cones, ice cream cones, that's what they thought. It wasn't ice cream cones, they were cones. So I called it the ice cream cone phenomenon, and this is stuck, and this is how Edleed Skalnin suddenly is connected to this cone phenomenon, building this amazing place called Coral Castle, all on his own. And these cone-shaped tools appear everywhere. This is from an ancient mine in England, cone-shaped tools in Egypt, completely ignored by Egyptologists, and more Egyptian funerary cones that are referred to as true of voice, or inscriptions that say true of voice on them. The Native American medicine men hit cone-shaped tools together in the kivas to create sounds, ringing sounds in their ceremonies. The big conical tower in the Great Zimbabwe ruins is a giant cone facing the sky. Whatever they were doing with that is really insane. In Australia, there are cone-shaped tools all over the place. I was given one of these as a sample for my museum last year. And then these mysterious gold-plated cone-shaped hats for special ceremonies and inaugurations. And why are wizards' hats cone-shaped? And why are wizards' wands cone-shaped? And if they're not cone-shaped, then they have a cone-shaped tool at the end of the wand. And this Mayan deity holding two cone-shaped tools, doing something with them in his hand. And those plates on his head and those spirals clearly indicating to us that it's encoded even more with knowledge of resonance. Here is another pre-Inca deity holding cone-shaped tools in his hand. Here is a little relief from Sumeria showing us the creation of Adamu, and the guy there holding a cone-shaped tool in his hand once again. And then it seems that at some stage humanity was manipulated with cone-shaped tools when you see these big carvings in Sumeria and from the Near East there. These winged beings and bird-headed beings using cone-shaped tools, very distinct, even looking like pine cones. Cone-shaped tools to manipulate humanity somehow. It is thought that they were controlling our pineal gland and our DNA, the tree of life, and with sound and frequency. And if you look deeper into this, you realize that our pineal gland is just, or the all-seeing eye of Horus is just actually a representation of the pineal gland that is deeply encoded with the ancient knowledge. And the fact that all this stuff has been encoded in the logos of the tools of manipulation. What are the tools of manipulation with sound and frequency today? Radio, TV, so forth. And you start seeing the all-seeing eye of Horus, and then the cone-shaped tools in the other logos that are encoded there. And this goes a lot further. There were artists and creative people in ancient times, not so long ago, that knew all this stuff. They knew that all this information is encoded, and they encoded it in their art. Thank you. And Michelangelo is one such guy that encoded this knowledge in his paintings, the famous creation of Adam, the fact that we are the creators of our reality, the same thing that quantum physics has already taught us more than 100 years ago, that we manifest our own reality. Do they teach us quantum physics at school to tell us this? Absolutely not. And then these cone-shaped tools found in the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose that commemorate the building of the temple of Inanna and other stone temples. And suddenly you've got a very critical common denominator. My latest discovery is the fact that dragonflies also use this technology. First of all, because we're going to run out of time here, because I've only got 10 minutes left for this section. So what happens with, what are these cone-shaped tools used for? Sound goes into it, like a laser beam. The coherent light goes into a crystal, and it focuses the light into a coherent beam. You can see it. With sound, you can't see the sound, so we think we're doing magic. Somebody's holding two cones in his hand, forcing or creating Caesar beams going through it. Caesar, as opposed to laser, it's coherent sound beams that are infinitely more powerful than laser beams. It'll look like magic. What happens around a sound beam, it's a vortex field that's been pumped into a coherent beam. You distort gravity. It's very well recorded by Russian scientists in the 30s and 40s already, the distortion of gravity fields around vortex fields. So this you can start using to levitate stuff and to do all these amazing things that we see in the ancient cultures and civilizations. But the greatest discovery here is actually how these gravity fields are shaped around vortex fields come from the dragonfly. The dragonfly doesn't flap its wings like birds do to fly. It just vibrates its wings. And how does it fly? Well, when you start looking, closely at the wings, it's got tiny little cones under its wings in all directions. And these are not arteries. These are tubes that carry sound through them. And the resonance of the vibrating wings goes into these tiny little cones and creating vortex fields, gravity distortion fields in all direction as the dragonfly moves. So all it does is just create the vibration, it moves the wings, and it goes wherever it wants in its own little gravity-free area, gravity-free zone. And that takes us to our own abilities. What have we got in our eyes and our retinas? We have got rods and cones. So we should be able to do very amazing and miraculous things, because our eyes, our optic nerve, is connected to the pineal gland, and if the pineal gland is a receiver, which we know it is, of all the sound and frequencies around us, our so-called third eye, with which we should be able to communicate telepathically, to understand the frequencies that we cannot hear or see, suddenly we start seeing that we should be able to do things like this. We should all be supermen and superwomen, being able to communicate, being able to do things, lift things, and so forth. But this, I think, takes us to the end of this presentation, because how much time have I got left? 5 minutes, okay. So what were these ruins in southern Africa used for? They were certainly not used for people or cows. They were not dwellings. It's all metamorphosized quartzite. All rock in the world has some amount of quartz in it, people. So it's all to do with silicon-based technology. Sound, stones that ring like bells are the key thing here. We're dealing with silica, quartz. Quartz has memory. It holds memory. It conducts light and sound. It is the pinnacle of our current knowledge and technology. It's all silicon-based technology. But now we know that we can store digital data in crystals. That's not even been released. That information is kept very, very guarded. Because once people know you can store trillions of terabytes in one little crystal, that's not good for business. It means they can't keep selling us new computers and new things every year. You'll buy it once and you have it forever. And that's really what this is all about. The hiding of knowledge and information. So all ancient structures are giant memory banks that have got all this knowledge encoded in it in the silica of the stones. And watch some little 12-year-old kid go up to Stonehenge, plug in his iPhone, and download some really interesting stuff very, very soon. The information is in there. We just don't know how to get it out yet. And so all these ancient sites, the pyramids, the Stonehenge, are all giant machines, all activated by the sound and light. And this is why they are aligned with the movement of the sun. At a certain time of the year, the sun comes in at the summer solstice, comes down a passage, hits a standing stone, which is what? A crystal. It's a stone, crystalline structure. And when it hits the stone, it's like hitting enter on your keyboard. The light and the sound of that light activates this machine, and it goes into action. It does whatever it's supposed to do. When the sun has moved to the winter solstice, it comes down another channel, and it hits another key on the keyboard on the machine, and the machine stops doing what it's doing or just starts doing something else. All to do with resonance. And this is exactly what we find in the pyramids. They're still resonating, giving off very interesting frequencies. And the same can be said for the stone circles. As you can see, this is a cymatic pattern of sand on a metal plate, exactly as we found the stone circles in southern Africa. Each stone circle represents a cymatic pattern coming out of the ground. And it takes that cymatic, the sound frequency, and it activates it, it amplifies it infinitely, and creates a huge, giant energy grid, which is still alive today. And that's, you can't see it, sorry, there's too much light on stage here. Giant energy grid, and this is where we start getting into the measurements that we did in the sound, with the sound frequencies and electromagnetic fields, and the fact that these stone circles give off more than, like this one here, gives off more than 30,000 decibels coming out of these walls at very, very high frequencies. So this is not just theory, this is well documented, well measured, scientifically proven and verifiable data. So if somebody tells you, I like that theory, it's an interesting theory. It's not a theory. This is a scientific measured fact. So keep an eye on this, because people often do this. Oh, that just sounds like a far-fetched theory. Which part of this is a theory? It's no longer, we're way out of the theory area here, people. So, and Adam's calendar is by far the most powerful one, because here we have two intersecting electromagnetic fields, one that runs horizontally, and then between the calendar stones in the middle, it runs vertically out of the ground. This is insane at very, very high frequencies, beyond 375 gigahertz, And we have what we call a vortex or an active portal over there that is still alive today. And I think I'm going to end this presentation here because it gets even more interesting and weird after this. But after this, we're going to take a break now and then go into what do we do with this knowledge and information. Because clearly this is just a huge body of knowledge and information that is out there. And next time, hopefully, you'll find some of these on YouTube because they're available across various presentations. What do we do with this information? This is where we're going to go to after the break. Thanks, people.